You're listening to Cards to the Moon, a podcast about trading cards from both a collector and investor perspective. We hope you'll stick around for the ride as we take a deep dive into the state of the hobby, share some hot takes, hopefully some useful advice, and fun stories along the way. Hey guys, welcome to Cards to the Moon. This is episode 275. My name is Clark from 5cardguys.com and 5cardguys on Instagram and on YouTube. I'm doing the intro for this Friday episode solo because I'll be playing a joint pod that I did with Paul Hickey of the Sports Card Strategy Show in just a bit. We talk about the Wemby injury and how that's impacted his card prices. Plus, we answer the question of whether we generally buy in when a star player gets injured. We also give our high-level view on breaking, and I thought that was an interesting discussion because our respective opinions differ. We'd love to hear what you guys think on that issue. And we also touch on Topps Composite Football, which Paul definitely knows more about. So for Cards to the Moon listeners, I know we don't talk football cards that much. So if you do collect football cards, I think you'll enjoy that particular segment. But first, just want to highlight one big auction that just started, and it's supposed to end on March 20th. Of course, I'm talking about the Paul Skenes 1/1 MLB debut patch rookie card. It's up on the Fanatics Collect auction site, and there's a full page dedicated to it. You can check it out by clicking on the link in our show notes. This will definitely break the MLB debut patch record, but how much it goes for exactly, that's anyone's guess. Let me know what you guys think. We'll see who's the closest after March 20th. But if you're looking for more affordable, but still high-end sports card auctions, shameless self-promotion, you can check out our site at 5cardguys.com/daily auctions, where we update the page every day. I'll include that link in the show notes as well. All right, with that, enjoy the joint pod with myself and Paul Hickey, and we'll have a brand new episode for you on Tuesday. See ya.
What's up, everybody? Paul Hickey here with the Sports Card Strategy Show and NoOffSeason.com. Welcome into another special edition with my guy Clark Kim, co-host of Cards to the Moon, as well as the man who runs the Instagram channel, 5Card Guys. What's up, Clark? How you doing, man?
Good. Yeah, I was just saying off air, it's good to connect with you and just talk cards. A lot of fun when we do these things.
For sure. I'm excited. I'm always excited to talk with you. And news from last week, and we've hit on it a little bit on the Sports Card Strategy Show this week already, but the data is ever changing and the news is ever changing in the sports landscape. Victor Wembanyama shut down for the season. We all know by now. Unfortunate news for those of us who were holding some Wemby cards in anticipation of maybe selling them during the NBA playoff run as the Spurs kind of souped up their team before the trade deadline and looked to be making a potential run at the bottom of the Western Conference playoffs to get in maybe in a play-in game. But I want to lead this into a topic. Early reports on the Victor Wembanyama market are kind of all over the place because he's still one of the top guys in sports cards, one of the top athletes in sports cards. And while we've seen some of his sales on his popular cards dip a little bit, we mentioned his Prism Silver Raw on this week's full episode of the Sports Card Strategy Show, has dipped down to under $200. Sorry, that's wrong. Under $300 is what I meant to say, and under $250 in one case. Before that, it was selling at over $400 before the injury. So post-injury, selling for under $400, in some cases under $300, although changing all the time because two sales before we recorded today for over $300. So I want to go over some Victor Wembanyama cards that are down since the injury, and then turn it over to Clark to talk about what he thinks about Victor Wembanyama's market overall, and then lead that into a question, which will be, what do you do when a star player gets injured? Is it an opportunity to buy in eventually during that injury and then sell when the player comes back? Or is it like panic sell mode, get rid of anything you have from that player and move into other things, or a little bit of both? So few things that caught my eye. Victor Wembanyama's 2023 Prism Blue out of 199 and PSA 9 is down almost $300. His Blue Wave Raw Prism is down $184. The Prism Silver that I mentioned a minute ago, Raw, is down $163. Green Ice Raw Prism is down $139. And the Hyper Prism PSA 9 is down $108. The Prism Silver PSA 10 down $103. The reason I kind of zeroed in on these cards, Clark, is because they're more like, other than the out of 199 blue, for example, they're more common cards. They're not the base cards, but they're more common cards, probably easier to find, probably easier to make plays on. And many of them that I just rattled off are raw. So you could still potentially go buy them raw, grade them, and make money even while Wemby's still out. But what say you, first of all, about the entire Victor Wembanyama situation?
Yeah, like you just mentioned off the top, it's unfortunate news of his injury, but just focusing on the sports card market, especially Wemby's in general. If you believe in a player like Wemby, like he's a generational player, he's kind of in his own category. I'm looking for opportunities to buy. And like you said, you've already seen the trend that there are people selling right now because of the injury, and a lot's unknown about the extent of his injury. And it's kind of scary, actually. Blood clots, it's a serious thing to definitely consider. So you don't know which way it's going to go. Like, I've been reading articles that Brandon Ingram, who's a Toronto Raptor now, he had a similar kind of condition, and he's still playing, so he's fine. But then we also had Chris Bosh, another former Raptor, and his career ended, right? And then, each situation was different, so you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But with Wemby, he's such a young guy. It looks like he keeps himself in shape. He's got the best doctors, I'm sure, working on him. And I think I'm hopefully optimistic that he'll return and he'll just kind of resume how he's been. And before this injury, I was all in. I might have even shared it with you and with my co-host at Cards to the Moon. I'm like, I'm looking desperately for a Wemby card. And I know you had Wemby on your top 5 list in terms of who you're targeting for this year. So we're both high on Wemby. But I think with that sentiment, I'm looking for opportunities to buy at lower discounted prices. But that being said, I'm probably still waiting. It's the news is fresh, and there's nothing I can see that will bump up his value until we hear news that he's, how well he's progressing. So you might as well wait till the off season. He's not coming back this year, right, or this season, and I'm sure it might even go down further. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just playing the waiting game, but he's always on my watch list. So I'm ready to go whenever that number hits the number in my mind for some of these cards that I'm targeting.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing. I'm licking my chops because I think his prices will continue to go down because of all the reasons that you mentioned. And he may not be in the news cycle for a long time. There may not be anything to report on this until we get much, much closer to the 2025-26 NBA season, which is a long way away. I think we've got 6 months potentially of his prices potentially going down before we see them start to rise again with the hype of maybe as early as September. Maybe the prices start to go up a little bit if the news is positive then. But anything short of him doing something spectacular on Instagram that draws a bunch of eyeballs or something and sets off something in the hobby, which I honestly can't see that happening. We're past the rookie hype. The real thing that I think he had going with him was the potential playoff run, which is not going to happen anymore. So I'm with you, man. I think this is an opportunity to I think the key part of what you said, let the prices continue to come down, because I think that even though I rattled off a bunch of data, it's still way early. And some of the raw data could just be condition dependent, to be honest with you. It's easy to manipulate data a little bit to the point that you're trying to make. And I'll be the first to admit that when I look at raw data, you definitely have to dig into each card and say, okay, well, did that card go down from 412 to 245 because the market really thinks it's only worth 245, or was that maybe a sale or a couple sales of something that's just like ridiculously off-centered or has a documented surface issue or something like that, especially when you're looking at raw cards. So for those of you kind of new to the hobby, definitely take the data with a grain of salt. Okay, Clark, so I wanted to ask you, do you have any examples or examples from anyone in your network, your co-host, anyone that you know, where they've really gone like all in on someone during an injury, like when a star player's been injured, anything you can think of where someone's gone all in on a player, like seriously spending a lot of money, whether it's on one card or just getting high volume of a particular player in anticipation of them coming back? And did it work out or did it backfire?
I mean, me buying Mike Trout, does that count?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually, I was wondering if that was going to be your example, because we've talked about Mike Trout a few times.
So I've dipped into the Mike Trout market, and I've shared this story before that I have a refractor now, and I paid about $5,000 for it, and it's the same thing every year. Spring training, he looks like he's in the greatest shape of his life, but you're still like a little nervous about what he's going to be doing and if he could maintain his health. But guys like that, these are the elite guys that when you look at their potential and their upside, it's huge if they're healthy, and that's the guys that I'm targeting in terms of if there is injury news and their prices drop significantly. I look at the upside and is it worth that risk, right? So, other guys, even Ronald Acuna, like he's had 2 ACLs and, it's serious injuries, and he's a runner. So obviously he's got to have healthy knees. But the potential is just extraordinary, with the 40 plus home run season, 70 plus steal. Like who else is going to be able to do that except Ronald Acuna? Maybe Shohei Ohtani, maybe if he runs more, but it's a short list. So those guys, I'm always looking at Acuna cards as well. But then, if anyone else like is not in that elite top tier, then I'm selling. Like I was really big one time on Eloy Jimenez. Like he has just a 30 perennial home run power, and he was just on a bad team for a couple of years. And you're like, if he stays healthy, then he could really boost his stats. But then he just started to deteriorate. He never really hit that peak that a lot of people who are into prospect hunting back in the day thought Eloy would be at. And then there comes a point where you just got to say, you know what, I'm just dumping at that point. And then you look at his card values now; it's below $100 for his first Bowman Chrome Auto base, and those used to be 3-4 times that at its peak. So case by case example, but it's kind of simple, to tell you the truth. When you kind of filter out who the top elite players are, you look at their upside. Have they accomplished that peak at one point in their career? So it's possible, and then you kind of evaluate the risk at that point. So yeah, Wemby's in that category. I know it's only his second year, but he had a phenomenal first year and a phenomenal first half of his second year. Doesn't look like he was slowing down anytime soon. That's why I was all in. I'm like, I saw what I needed to see, and there you go.
Yeah, I agree with you on Wemby. I think, from the hype coming over from France, I mean, there was hype around him when he was like 17, 18, and then the NBA did an amazing job, like bringing him over with the Metropolitans 92 team and playing against Scoot Henderson's G League team and featuring it on NBA.com and everything. And so the world knew about Wemby, and Wemby has been living up to the hype, I think, for multiple years, at least. And to your point, one extraordinary year and a half in the NBA where he's legit. I love what you said about if it's not top tier talent, it's probably time to just cut bait and or at least not buy in. Maybe I think the strategy would be if any of you are holding a player that gets injured and they're not literally like one of the top 5 bona fide athletes in their sport, it's probably a good idea to either get rid of them if it's a maybe lower tier card anyway, or if it's a card that you're into for quite a bit of money and the card is, an autograph card or lower serial numbered card or something that has the ability to potentially bounce back, I would say hold until there's news of them coming back or positive news around them, and then probably start to look to sell if it's not one of the top tier guys. Because to Clark's point, I've definitely taken bets in the past on guys that had potential but had never really achieved it, and then suffered an injury or some kind of setback, and they just never really end up getting to where you buy in at them for, and so it's kind of a recipe for disaster. So I wouldn't take risks on buying into guys that haven't kind of already been there. Like, I think Mike Trout's a good example of like somebody that, you know, made sense / makes sense to buy into, because he's been, I mean, you look at, you know, the MVP awards that he's won, and kind of, you know, he was the perennial best player in the MLB by far for you know, almost 10 years. So that's different, obviously, than Eloy Jimenez, which is a great example, kind of, you know, what not to do for everybody out there. I think my other thing that I'll add, and you've kind of alluded to this, is it really does depend on the card, and it really does depend on the buy-in point if you're looking to buy an injured player. So, for example, last year I bought into Joe Burrow when he got injured towards the end of the NFL regular season in 2024. Sorry, in 2023, the end of the 2023 regular season. And he had the calf injury going into training camp. He had hit his wrist on someone's helmet and underwent surgery, I think, on the wrist, and that's what shut down his season. So it was a mixed bag for me, because I bought one of his Optic Hollow PSA 10s for well under what the comps were going for, I would say a month after the injury. And I did really, really well on that card. The market bounced back for Burrow like I thought it would. And I made money because of that, but also mainly because of the buy-in point. Now, other Burrow cards, I kind of broke even on. I've said, I'm going to go all in on Burrow, right? Because I had been waiting for a chance to buy Joe Burrow. His prices were so high for so long. Well, some of the other cards didn't bounce back, you know? And so I think you got to, and I'll be honest, they were base Prism PSA 10s were the ones that just did not bounce back. And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? Because those are the ones that are probably the easiest to find. Whereas the Optic Hollow PSA 10 is a little bit more of a short printed card. There's fewer of them, and that's probably why I was able to do well on that one. Even though I bought both low, one bounced back, one didn't. So I think it depends on, that's why I say the right card for the right player at the right time if you're looking at this strategy.
No, I agree. I'll just add too that kind of the same thing applies when you look at Wemby's Silver Prism, and I'm glad you kind of rattled off the raw data, because we don't tend to look at the raw cards on our podcast, and it's just easier to grade apples to apples or compare apples to apples with graded cards. So if you look at the Silver Prism PSA 10s, that's also followed the trend of the value of the cards going down in the past couple weeks because of the injury news. I think it's at 700 now on average, and then it was like 800-900 even a month ago. So it's gone down, but kind of to your point with those base prisms, like there are over 4,000 PSA 10 Silver Prisms. So you got to look at the pop count as well, and that's going to put I think a slight ceiling on how much it will bounce back because of the pop count, right? So I think a better play is, if you can afford it, those serial numbered, lower numbered, higher end cards that have dropped, and if any of those cards, you can expect those cards to bounce more higher when you start to hear good Wemby news again. So that's kind of, I guess, what I'm looking at. I'm looking at like the top refractor and things like that, right? So yeah,
that's a good point. I mean, if you look at the Prism Silver PSA 10s, it's reasonable to think that it would bounce back to over $1,000 because they were selling for $900 about a month ago before the injury. Now they're down at $700. I think in order to actually make money on those, you have to wait until they get closer to closer to 500. So if they get closer to 500,
Sure.
that's probably why when I start buying in, because of your point, the pop count 4,300. The blue out of 199, for example, it's a pop 78 in PSA 9, only a pop 66 in PSA 10, a pop 16 in PSA 8. So pretty elusive card to try and like buy graded. Obviously, there's only 199 of them in existence. So, but yeah, buying, like, I love the idea of, but I mean, that one went for 2,300 before the injury, and then immediate post injury 2,030. So it went down by $300. On one hand, spending $2,000 on a card to make 300 may not make a whole lot of sense to people, but could you buy that card raw throughout the off season for closer to under 1,500 or closer to 1,000? Now, to Clark's point, I think that would be definitely a play, knowing that, you know, you could spending 1,000 to make 1,000 makes a lot more sense.
Yes. Or, you know, you just got to hope that you get traded to the Lakers.
Yeah, which you never know. I mean, you never know.
No one's untouchable, I guess, these days.
You think that someone's gonna be the guy that's gonna be untradeable, and apparently that's not the case with our guy Luka. So, speaking of Luka, what's your update on your Luka cards since the trade?
So, I mean, my card's numbered to 99, so you don't see a lot of transactions, right? But I made that joke because I did see the silver prism spike up after that trade.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, I wish I held onto my silver prism. But obviously there's no way of knowing that he would have. I guess no one really knew that this trade was going to happen except like 3 people in this world. So you never know. But yeah, it was interesting. It's kind of come down a little bit. But I think you've always mentioned this, right? When there's like news like that, that's a selling marker, I guess, you know?
Big time.
Using your words. And I hope people made some money because of the trade.
I hope people sold their Luka Prism Silver PSA 10s or whatever grade they had, because they would have made some money based on where they bought in at. That's for sure. All right, so one thing that kind of caught my eye that we talked about earlier this week on the Sports Card Strategy Show is the release of Topps Chrome Football. So this is an unlicensed release. It's actually technically like the first year of Topps Chrome Football back, because the 2023 release was actually Topps Composite Football, and it had Topps Chrome in it, which was kind of like Fanatics' version of Panini Chronicles, in my opinion.
Yes.
It's kind of like
was
like horrible, just absolutely horrible. It slaughtered CJ Stroud's rookie card value before he slaughtered it himself by totally stinking up his sophomore season. But I guess that leads me into my question. I have several questions for you about this. Like, first of all, does this release strike you as something positive for the hobby, something negative for the hobby, something neutral for the hobby? What's your take on the overall comeback of Topps Chrome Football? Because I know a lot of people are going to immediately just be super pumped that this is already, you know, they can already go buy. I mean, I know Topps already sold out right away of like the hobby boxes, the hobby cases, but you can still go to Topps.com and buy kind of the equivalent of like a blaster box type situation. And then obviously you can get it on eBay and stuff. What's your take on 2024 Topps Chrome Football?
Yeah, I mean, I always come to you for football card news and football card advice, but for me, I'm not buying Topps Chrome Football because I'm not into football cards as much, but I definitely see the parallel between this release and Topps Chrome Basketball, right? So that's where my head goes to right away. And if you look at the trend of Topps Chrome Basketball, since the hype, everything's kind of come down. And the only thing that's been selling from Topps Chrome Basketball, obviously, are Wemby cards and low-numbered LeBron cards. So everything else is kind of has a very little value. Like, I bought a Topps Chrome Basketball. I didn't hit a Wemby card. I didn't hit a LeBron card. So my whole total value of my $300 that I paid for the Topps Chrome Basketball is probably worth $2. You know what I mean? Like,
And the
it's not
players look like they're in rec league uniforms. I mean, it's
right.
god awful.
Unlicensed product, right?
Yeah.
So I'm expecting more of the same with Topps Chrome Football. You'll get the marquee players, maybe the Caleb Williams. That's probably the chase, and of course Tom Brady has an autograph card. So those are the chase cards, but they're very few and far between. So other than that, I don't see a lot of value other than the
Yeah.
top players. So that's kind of where I stand. Just very similar to Topps Chrome Basketball release, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. I mean, we've already seen the market for Topps Chrome Basketball did not do very well. It had Wemby autos where, some of the photos were okay where you could see the back of his jersey like with his name, didn't look too bad the way that they did that, but a lot of them, even Topps Mercury, to me were just, and they even had game used stuff in Topps Mercury, which is cool, but I was not a fan of that unlicensed product. I was not a fan of the Topps Composite Football unlicensed product. That had a very, very low gem rate. Topps Composite Chrome had a very low gem rate. CJ Stroud's cards there had like under 35% gem rate, kind of across the board, at least for the achievable cards. The Topps Chrome commercial with Caleb Williams and Jim McMahon got a lot of love, which I believe it deserved. I think the commercial itself
Loved it.
was one of the better pieces of creative that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
The issue that I have with the release and the way that Fanatics is positioning the release and the way that Fanatics has actually positioned itself is that it is promoting all of the chase cards to the point where it kind of looks and feels like you're going to get a chase card if you buy the product. And not only that, but Fanatics owns a breaking platform. Well, it's technically a live shopping platform, but let's be honest, it's basically a breaking platform, Fanatics Live. And so what I don't like, I'm just going to come out and say it. I said it in an earlier episode this week of the Sports Card Strategy Show. I'm going to say it in front of you and get your take on it. And you can call me wrong. You can side with me, whatever. But the reason I'm telling you is because I really want not only your take on it, but the Cards to the Moon audience. Like, I'm curious, what does the Cards to the Moon audience think of what I'm about to say? And that is, I see a serious issue with this Caleb Williams commercial, for example, leading directly into people buying into breaks. Because if you follow the marketing funnel, it basically takes you from the commercial to the website to buy the product, but all of the product is sold out. And the thing right at the top of the page is buy into breaks for this product on Fanatics Live and get $25 off breaks for this product on Fanatics Live. And I see buying into breaks is a major problem, not only in the hobby, but in society, because it's basically people pissing their money away gambling. And I think there's a greater risk to the hobby for people to come in, lose a ton of money, get pissed off, and then leave because they're not anywhere near the cool Caleb Williams inscription, right? And we talked a little bit about this, I think, with the Paul Skenes, the kid who pulled the Paul Skenes. I may have mentioned on Cards to the Moon about, my opinion on when anyone pulls the top, whether it be the Topps MLB debut patch, whether it be one of these one-of-one inscription autos from Caleb Williams. I don't like the way that Fanatics is positioning this to the hobby as the best way to try to get this card is to buy into breaks, or the best way to try to get this product is to buy into breaks. What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I think it's a fair point that you bring up, right? And I think I saw a clip recently during Topps Rip Night where Michael Rubin was mentioning the general breakdown of how their product is allocated, and 40% of it goes to breakers. So it's a big chunk of their business. So from a business side of things, it makes total sense how they're marketing it, right? And kind of what you mentioned about the commercial, I think it's a genius marketing move by Fanatics because it's unlicensed. So what do they focus on? The autograph. That's what they have, right? And that's what they're going to try to get people to buy into. trying to get these autographed cards. And I think I haven't really thought about the funnel that you kind of outlined about, going to the website and then finding that the only way you can really get your hands on these products are through breaks. And I think that's a real possibility that people can go down that kind of rabbit hole and find themselves in breaks. But at the same time, if I'm honest, I think there's enough people in the hobby that will look at this and maybe get discouraged that they can't get their hands on the product, but it won't make them want to get into breaks. They'll just be resigned to getting something else. Or like me, I'm waiting for singles. I might as well just buy the singles or what I want on eBay. So there's other avenues to get the cards you want. And I don't have any problems with breaks. I just don't participate in that many breaks, to tell you the truth. And at the same time, I don't, think it's a huge problem, but at the same time, I understand the greater perspective and the view of this being another form of gambling. And like everything else, it has to be addressed at some point, whether it's sports betting or even sports card breaking. It's kind of in the same boat. So I think it's one of those things that you should never kind of shut the door on in terms of the discussion. You should see how things unravel. But at the same time, I feel like, and this is only my opinion, that it's a little maybe premature to see how things will actually play out in terms of whether breaking does become a serious societal issue even. And, as more people get into the hobby, like how many of those people will be impacted by something like this, whether it's a gambling issue or not. We don't know yet, but like I said, I think it's something worth monitoring over time.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective on that, because I think, no one loves to just stay in their lane more than me. I love to just stay in my lane and be like, okay, well, let all these people waste their money on breaks and I'll go buy singles like you said. So I'm good with that. I just think, I guess where I've become a little bit more passionate over the last, to be honest with you, maybe 1 to 2 months on this issue is because many of our members at nooffseason.com join, and the first thing they say is, thank goodness I found you because I've been wasting a bunch of my money on breaks. And I relate to that because when I first re-entered the hobby back in late 2020, I was kind of getting hit up by all these breakers like, hey, I'm like, oh, that sounds fun. I'll try that. But then the feeling of basically going to a roulette table and spinning the roulette wheel and losing a ton of money and getting nothing for it set in real quick for me on the breaking. And that's kind of what flipped the switch for me doing what I do now and what I've done for the last 5 years, which is basically what you said, just, try to, and what we always talk about, which is try to buy the singles for the right card, for the right player at the right time, and don't go down that rabbit hole of breaking. I know people feel differently about it. I know people feel like, hey, this is it's legal. We know what we're getting ourselves into. We're not idiots. We get it. And who is Paul Hickey to say, don't buy into breaks? So I understand if you're going to buy into breaks and give yourself a chance at one of these Caleb Williams inscription autos, which are pretty cool. I mean, as long as you know that, it's entertainment budget, don't expect anything out of it. Only spend what you can afford to lose and be okay with losing, then I would say great. But what I will kind of go on the record and say that I think it's short-sighted and a bit selfish of Michael Rubin and the powers that be at Fanatics to be pushing breaking so hardcore down our throats when it's already something that people have done and do. And so to allocate, I didn't know what you said. And obviously, we're both kind of getting it second and third hand. But if they do, in fact, allocate 40% of this particular product or any particular product to breakers, A, I wouldn't be surprised. B, when I think about it, it kind of pisses me off. It kind of I just don't know that it should be like that. I would be more comfortable with, 10 to 20% to breakers. I think breakers are already in a position where they can scalp the general public with the opportunity to potentially get a hit on a card. And look, I know breakers have to grind. I know breakers have to do everything that everybody else does to make money. It's not that I don't respect breakers. It's just that it's not for me. So maybe I just need to go back into my lane and shut up. And I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. I totally get where you're coming from as well, and because like I said, I don't break as often or at all really in the past few years. I'd rather prefer buying singles on eBay. So that's where I'm coming from. But something that we discussed on Cards to the Moon, and Hyung brought up this point, is that if you hypothetically take away half that allocation to go to hobby shops, for instance, right? The demand theoretically will still be there for a product like Topps Chrome Football or Topps Chrome Basketball, and wait till it's licensed. Then the demand's going to be through the roof. What's the difference between getting it from breaking and the breakers kind of setting the price versus the hobby shops kind of allocating more of their inventory at higher prices for their own profit, you know? And if you do have something in, I don't know how they would do this, but if you say we're only going to give you these boxes, but you can't sell it for more than $300. Let's say that, and or if you do, you're going to get penalized. We're not going to allocate any more funds to you. Just say they could do something like that. Okay, fine. Then you got even more demand because you can buy boxes at a relatively affordable prices. But then what happens to the secondhand market? You see these boxes relisted on eBay for $600, $700, $800. So at the end of the day, the market is the market, and I don't know how to fix it. I'm not saying that's right, but we get to the same problem of boxes costing too much when the demand is so hyped up and there's all these hits. So I'm thinking that whether it's by breakers or whether it's by secondhand sellers on eBay, there's still that issue of expensive boxes. I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that, but I'm just laying out that scenario, and maybe that's something we have to try to creatively find a solution for.
Yeah, and I think one could argue that you could be addicted to ripping wax and you could be addicted to breaking, and there's addictions for everything in our society. Potentially people are addicted to overeating, they're addicted to undereating, they're addicted to all kinds of things, right? Gambling, drugs, everything. So maybe Netflix, maybe the Sports Card Strategy Show, maybe Cards to the Moon podcast, they're addicted. Right. So I mean, look, who am I again to say this or that? I think it just kind of hit me that the actual product manufacturer is the one promoting this breaking. But you could also say, look, Paul, Michael Rubin just understands that that's the market. He's not trying to change the market. He's just going with the fact that everybody likes to break and buy into breaks. And that's cool. And I agree with what you said too. I mean, we wouldn't really be able to buy the singles without someone. The singles wouldn't really necessarily have as much value, potentially, one could argue, if everything was just kind of like print on demand online. Like right. They definitely, I mean, I would disagree with people who just kind of blindly say the only reason we can do what we do is because people open stuff out of packs or buy into breaks. That's not necessarily true. I make a lot of money just buying print on demand stuff and grading it and selling it. So I would disagree with people that say like, we need this in our world for the thing that you do, Paul. So who are you to say, no, I don't really need it, but I'm also not like, I agree with you too. I'm just kind of opening the discussion. I'm definitely not the person who's going to like go further down the rabbit hole. To me, it just struck me as like, okay. So they really like, this really is a thing where from the top, the actual card manufacturer, the people actually making the cards are going to tell us you should buy into breaks to get this product. I don't know why it hit me. Like, of course they've had Fanatics Live for a couple of years now. I don't know why it hit me 2 years in. It just had something to do with seeing Caleb Williams and Jim McMahon, who I idolized Jim McMahon as a kid. Right. And then Caleb Williams, I really, really like him. I thought the commercial was amazing. So I dug into it because of the commercial, and it just hit me. Wow. Okay. Breaking. There it is. Yeah. All right. Good stuff though. So Clark, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I'm curious, like, you and your co-hosts at Cards to the Moon, I have a lot of respect for you guys, put out a lot of great content. I love the Cards to the Moon community. How well do you personally track your inventory, and is inventory tracking something that you and your co-host talk amongst yourselves about or with your audience members about? Just kind of curious. Like, I know a lot of people would track their inventory for different reasons. Maybe some people are selling like thousands of cards, and so they have the need to use some sort of software program that also helps them list. And then there's people like me who are more on the side of, I track my inventory because I want to know how much I paid for each individual card so that I can hold myself accountable to, like, am I actually doing what I say that I do, which is making money flipping sports cards. But what's your inventory tracking philosophy?
It's a great question. And I can't speak on behalf of my co-hosts. Like, they have a lot more cards than I do. So obviously their answer is going to depend on, how many cards they have and what their system is. They have cases and cases, and every time they go to a sports card show, I can fit the cards that I want to look to trade or sell in my small pouch, right? Versus them carrying around cases. And I even when I saw you at FanFest, with the backpack and everything else to carry all the stuff. But with and maybe it's because I tend to gravitate more towards middle to higher end cards. So obviously those cost a lot more. I'm not buying a bunch of those. So it's easy for me to track because I just use Card Ladder. There's a function in Card Ladder where you could type in your cards. They seem to have a very robust database, and it's easy for me to track. And I personally think it's very useful, right? Before I had a subscription to Card Ladder, I'm a spreadsheets guy as well. So I used to mark down how much I pay for a hobby box, and then when I rip, I see what singles I'm able to flip, and then I'll keep track of it on the spreadsheet. So I know not everyone is into spreadsheet, that doesn't do it for them, but it is a great visual way to see profit and losses. And that's what I realized, Paul, to tell you the truth, when you start tracking it on the spreadsheet and you rip wax, it's really evident how much money you're losing usually.
That's what I wanted to ask you when you brought that up. Like, how do you assign? So let's say you buy a hobby box for $200, and you get, say, a card that is valued at $35, or, to do easy math, like $50. So, but then everything else is like nothing. So do you say that you sell that card for $50 and you're out $150, or do you actually try to maybe assign less cost to that card because technically you got more product? How do you assign like your profit loss to the actual single or singles that you sold out of a hobby box?
Yeah, in that case, if it's a base, like all those base cards, that I really mark that as a loss, like a $0 sum. Yeah, and then like with the card that you do sell, you have to incorporate sometimes the grading if you do end up grading it. So that's a simple calculation you could put in your spreadsheet, and just really keep it simple that way.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think it's hard to do. It's hard to look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, well, I spent $200 on this hobby box. I got this card. I sold it for $50. I think a lot of people probably say, well, I'm going to chalk that up to entertainment budget, and I made $50. And so it's a $50 profit. And so, I mean, that's fine if that's what you do. But I personally like what Clark said he does more, because I think you're actually able to then go back and say, okay, do I really want to keep buying and ripping this wax? Man, people hearing me for the first time are probably like, who is this guy? Like, how does he not understand that we have to rip wax? I do understand. There's already people ripping wax. It's not I'm just someone who can go onto eBay and see tens of millions of cards listed. So I don't need to buy wax to get singles.
That's discipline, okay?
That's discipline. And so is inventory tracking. So back to inventory tracking. I like what you said about Card Ladder. I know Market Movers also has a feature like inventory tracker. There's a lot of great software applications out there that allow you to track your inventory. I was a G Sheets guy until I figured out a little way to build an inventory tracker into our premium membership at nooffseason.com. So actually now that's a little simpler. The inventory tracker at nooffseason.com. I wouldn't say it's better or worse than Market Movers or Card Ladder, but I would say it's just very, very simple. So if you just want to manage everything yourself, understand like your total P&L, profit and loss, your total return on investment by percentage, the total amount of money you've spent on cards, and then your average total price sold, average profit and loss per card, with some cool graphs and charts. So that's what I use.
Nice.
And then you can download it into Excel if you want to. So I just think it's important, whatever you use to track it, whether it's, you could just type it up in an email to yourself for all I care. But I think as long as my recommendation is that we all should be holding ourselves accountable at least. And look, if you are in it for completely different reasons than I'm in it for, I'm in it to make money. Many people are in it more to have fun, and because it is a hobby, and I totally get that, but still just kind of keep track of your stuff because you want to know what worked and what didn't work for you, because then you can have more fun, I think.
I agree with you. And like you, it's part of a small part of my business as well in terms of trying to make money off sports cards. And it's very useful, especially during this time of year when it's tax season. So my accountant really appreciates the spreadsheets that I give to him, and
that's good. Actually, without divulging too much, just give us kind of an overview of like what you're willing to talk about in front of your audience regarding the tax side of sports cards, and I can give you guys my personal experience as well, because a lot of our audience members ask me about that. From not only, so there's obviously two different types of taxes. Clark's talking about the end of the year tax return. And then obviously there's like taxes on each individual purchase. That's more sales tax. Clark's talking more about the income tax. So from an income tax perspective, what are you able to share with us, Clark?
I'm not sure. I guess I don't know how different it would be from the States to Canada.
Yeah, Canada. Yeah, exactly.
But was it last year or the year before? It was a pretty rough year for like making any kind of money on sports cards after the pandemic hype, and I just kind of offloaded.
2022 was pretty rough.
That's the year, right? So so I was able to write off a lot of things against any profit I might have made or income that I might have made through just creating hobby content. So it kind of balanced it out. So that's really for me, it's that simple. Like, and if you had a great year in terms of flipping, then I'll you could offset that with some of the expenses that you incur throughout the year. So to tell you the truth, I'm glad I hired an accountant for all of this.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I just keep track of the data, kind of what we're talking about in terms of inventory tracking, and he'll kind of summarize how I already kind of have an idea of how good or bad a year it's been before I submit all the information. But he'll put it in a nice kind of summary format. But yeah, it's kind of like just balancing it with one part of your business to the another part of your business.
Yep, keeping track of your purchases, whether it's in the spreadsheet like Clark said, or just in general, a list of your purchases with the receipts. Whether you guys are all going to have receipts from grading companies, you're going to have receipts from card shops, from eBay. Now from eBay, the thing that I think sort of changed the game and made income taxes more of a discussion in the hobby was a few years ago, eBay started sending what's called a 1099K form, sort of like a miscellaneous income form, to anyone that had sold over $600 in which basically was everybody at that point. And so depending on how much you're selling on eBay, you would get like a miscellaneous income form from eBay, which you would need to give to your tax professional. If you do your own taxes on like TurboTax or something, you have to file that. So I think that's probably what spurred most of the discussion around like what can you expense, what can you not expense, those types of things. Clark and I aren't here to answer those questions. Those needs to go to your tax professional. But from my sake, it's similar to what Clark said. It's like, look, this is like running a business. You got to treat it like you got to treat it like any business. So you keep track of your income, you keep track of your expenses. And then, for me, I file jointly with my wife. So it just goes into our overall tax return. Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to have different philosophies on how to keep track of that. And we actually have at Sports Card School at nooffseason.com, we have more on the sales tax piece. So if you're interested in it, we talked about the income tax very vaguely, but on the sales tax piece, if you want to learn essentially how to avoid paying sales tax, may not be a problem in Canada, but in the United States, it can, depending on what state you live in, some people are paying way more sales tax on sports card purchases than others. So,
It's good to know all that information for sure.
There's a lot that can go into it. But look, at the end of the day, everybody, just have fun.
Yes.
You don't want to listen to me and you want to buy into breaks because that's your thing. That's totally cool with me. I still love you. We're ready for you at nooffseason.com when you get sick of breaking. I'll say.
There you go.
Love cards to the moon. Clark, anything else you want to talk about for today's joint pod?
No, I mean, there's, in the last Cards to the Moon episode, we talked about Wemby, but we talked about Wemby in context of the WNBA Prism product the release. It's kind of crazy just how much it's going for. And obviously it's because of the Caitlin Clark chase. I don't know, to close this episode off, I'm curious about your thoughts about the WNBA Prism product. What are you doing? Are you all in on the Caitlin Clark hype, or what's in your head?
So, as you alluded to, my strategy for 2025 is I'm only buying 5 players. There's a bunch of reasons for that. We won't get into it, but I want to put myself in a box. So because I'm in that box and Caitlin Clark is one of my 5, I have dipped my toe into the water buying some of the Caitlin Clark WNBA Prism singles in auctions because they actually were priced less than I thought they would be. And I think I'm in a position financially and geographically to where I can dip my toe into buying some Caitlin Clark singles out of that release for between $50 and $80 a piece, getting them to PSA right away. Essentially, my play is to try to be maybe not literally first to the market with those cards, but in that first wave where I think if I'm all in on each individual card, including the grading fee for under $100, I think the cards I'm looking at buying out of that release should sell in a PSA 9 for at least my money back, and in a PSA 10, I should at least double my money, I think, worst case scenario. So I'm about, say, 8 to 10 cards deep into the WNBA Prism Caitlin Clark. Now, I know a lot of people at nooffseason.com premium members have asked me about like Cameron Brink and Angel Reese and some of the other players. Right. I'm just not into, I don't subscribe to the philosophy that because Caitlin Clark has a massive card market, that these other players have anywhere near the size of a market or will sort of ride the coattails of her popularity. I think people understand who Angel Reese is. I think certain people understand who Cameron Brink is, and maybe some of the other players. I think Caitlin Clark is in a stratosphere of her own. My advice to people who are new is don't assume because there's one popular player in a sport that a good example would be people going and buying Yamamoto because of Ohtani. Right. Or people maybe buying Jack Caglione because of Ohtani, because Ohtani transcended, he wasn't the first player to come over from Japan, but he was the first player to actually hit and pitch at the level that he's hit and pitch at. So I threw out one Japanese pitcher and then an American player who supposedly can do both as well. At least on Jack's first Bowman Chrome, it says pitcher and DH. So they're kind of like Ohtani. Don't assume that next player is going to be anywhere near as popular or have as much hype or success as the player that was the one that kind of blazed the trail. So that's my way of saying, for Caitlin Clark, just be careful. Be careful about Paige Beckers. Be careful about Juju Watkins. Is women's basketball and the card market growing? Yes. But is Juju Watkins or Paige Beckers or any of these other players, they're not in WNBA Prism yet. Obviously, they're still in college. But I've just seen a lot of people try and prospect on them being the next Caitlin Clark. I don't know how you guys feel about like the whole the next thing, but I'll throw the word of caution out there. So I answered your question and then some about WNBA Prism, but that's where I'm at with it.
No, and I knew Caitlin Clark was on your list. That's why I wanted to ask you that question. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that. And I'm in a complete agreement with you. Caitlin Clark's in her own category. And the one main difference of what you mentioned between the Shohei and Jack Caglione comp is there's going to be a market for Jack Caglione because the MLB market is so much bigger than the WNBA market, right? And the WNBA market, I agree, is growing, namely because of Caitlin Clark, but is still comparatively a very, very small market. And because it's a small market, comparatively speaking, I don't know if you're going to have that many buyers for like these secondary, tertiary players. So Caitlin Clark's the only one, if I'm targeting anything from the WNBA product, Caitlin Clark's the only one I'm going for in any of these eBay auctions. I've been looking at them. $1,200 a hobby box. It's not worth $1,200. You might as well buy silver prism for $300. You know what I mean?
For sure. Go buy 4 silver prisms instead of a hobby box. That would be my advice. Yes. Good call there, Clark. And I like what you said too about the Caglione comp because you're right. Like, people have been buying Bowman Chrome firsts for a while of all sorts of guys. So definitely different when it comes to the WNBA. Good stuff today, man. Well, it's always great talking to you. Everybody else at Cards to the Moon, love all of you, and thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, can't wait for the next time.
Sounds good, man.
Hey, thanks for listening to Cards to the Moon. We'd really appreciate you subscribing to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also connect with each of us on Instagram at 5cardguys, or you can follow Hyung at Integrity Sports Cards, or John at TradeU at Recess. You can also check us out at 5cardguys.com. Thanks again, and hope to connect soon.